Hi, and the next session is Krishna Madhavan from Microsoft Bing. Welcome.
Hey, Jason, so good to be here at the Kalicube Summit. Looking forward to the conversation ahead.
Brilliant. Me too. I'm going to start off with something you said, which is time and cyberspace just converged. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, the thing is, if you look at all the AI work that is very popular right now and how people are interacting with AI and the kinds of questions and the depth of information that people are seeking, the space between when the user actually makes a query or asks a question to the amount of information that gets synthesized in just a few milliseconds is extraordinary. So essentially, what is happening is in the very fraction of milliseconds that people are just batting their eyelids, or a cat takes to react, as I said in my talks and in all of my conversations, the whole web is processed in a way that is completely accessible from the perspective of the user. That's extraordinary, and it's being presented back to them in a way that answers questions that were kind of vague and hard to answer, right? For the most part. And so we are getting to a point where this millisecond time frame that we are working with is extremely fascinating to examine. That's why I made that statement.
Brilliant. Because I remember, and it was watching the querying 80 sites, and it goes through and you can watch it going blah, 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 through all of these different, and you're going, wow, that's fast. B, how does it find the information so fast? Then it summarizes it and gives me the answer. And you look at it and you think, well, that's just saved me browsing 70, 80, 100 sites.
Yeah. And if you look at it, yesterday we announced WebIQ, which is our grounding layer at Microsoft, right? We are saying that it's 2x faster than anything out there. We think that that's a pretty extraordinary achievement, considering that what is out there is extremely fast. And it's still within this very small fraction of a millisecond that people are actually used to in terms of just traditional search, right?
And well, two things there. Number one, describe what it is. And number two, I assume then speed is the absolute winner here.
Right. Imagine you're asking a deep query, right? Like you're asking something that requires significant amounts of processing, that asks the AI systems to frame something in a very creative way, or in a way that actually is very difficult to understand for the end user. And you've asked a question that requires this simplification. Imagine just sitting there for 5 minutes waiting for this answer to appear on your screen. Nobody has that kind of time. Convenience is essentially represented in terms of fractions of milliseconds. The reason why people want to use these systems to process this is that it's significantly faster than anything that they have and that they could process, right? So time is pretty important. And particularly if you look at a grounding platform like WebIQ, or what is happening with all of our competitors, the scale at which we are operating, there's hundreds of millions of users that are interacting with these systems at any given time. It's not about saving 1 millisecond for one user. It is saving 1 millisecond for hundreds of millions of users. And that adds up in terms of productivity, right?
Right. So WebIQ, is it just a better version of grounding that you were doing before?
So it is a brand new platform that we built ground up. Right. So, and we've been working on this for a very long time now. And if you look at how we have been communicating about it, in fact, the kinds of posts that I've been making on LinkedIn, the kinds of tooling that we have made available to the community, first of a kind tooling, the depth of the visibility that we are offering, these are all things that need to get packaged along with the grounding layer. It's not just about providing grounding anymore, right? It is about saying, hey, if you actually are on this grounding layer, you can access information that shows you how your site is performing, how end users are looking at your content, what is their topic, what is their intent, what are the grounding queries that the system is parsing out based on what the user is asking. All of these components need to come together, and all that together is the grounding layer, right? Like WebIQ as a product essentially commoditizes that in a way that has never been done before, which is extraordinary. right?
Yeah, no, 100, well, 100%. I'm super, super happy to have heard that. Now, you also said that the index is not sorted. I think that confirms some of the things that I've been saying, but please go ahead and explain what exactly you mean.
So if you really think about the internet, which is growing in scale and proportion every single second of the day, to sort everything into some sort of a list by which we can order everything is almost impossible, right? So if you really think about how the web is organized, it's highly networked, it's cross-linked, it's chaotic, and to impose any sort of order on it is very difficult. It's a complex problem to solve, and also not every part of the internet is actually useful, right? So there are parts of the internet that are just absolutely not useful. I would say there's spammy, there's junk, there's malicious stuff that we have to process, but all of that is not really useful for the people. It is useful for the system to know about it, but um, it is organized in a way that is kind of counterintuitive. The chaos is the organization in some way, right? So
Yeah, the chaos is the organization.
right.
Expand on that.
So if you look at systems that are extremely stable, they are chaotic systems, right? Um, for example, if you think about a house that is completely clean, that is everything is in its right place, everything is ordered in the bookshelf, it doesn't
Not
stay
my
that way
house.
for very long. But that's a
Yeah.
problem. You can spend a lot of time cleaning this, and you can put things in its right place. And I clean my house, I vacuum the house, and then the cats come and make a mess, right? Like so, the chaos is the stable version of something that we see on the internet. This is way truer than anywhere else. People think of the internet as this extremely ordered and well organized system. There is some organization behind it that allows us to find things, that allows us to discover things, uh, that allows us to figure out what the outlinks are and what the inlinks are and all of that stuff. But to think that the internet is completely organized is not true, right?
No, 100%. I mean, I've been kind of arguing that we have that impression because Microsoft, Bing, and Google present an organized 10 blue links or an organized result in an AI engine. So we
Right.
kind of get that impression. And when I talk to clients, they're saying, but it is organized. And of course it isn't.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That is where the milliseconds matter, right? Like think
Right.
about this extremely chaotic environment that people like me and all of the people working in search essentially have to not only access but also organize in some way that is presentable back to the end user. That is what the index is.
Mm.
So the organization is multidimensional, right? It has multiple facets to it. It is not just an ordered list of things. It is not that there is like just a equivalent hash for everything that exists on the internet in the index. That's not how it works. It's multidimensional. Multiple characteristics are represented across the board, and it's extremely difficult to do. Even traditional search, the 10 blue links, people
Mm.
somehow dismiss that, but 10 blue links to process the internet and present it back as 10 blue links is an extraordinary feat of engineering. And to do that in the kinds of depth that we are seeing right now, where agentic systems can operate and query, and users can set off agents to go do things for them, like book a travel ticket, and you can go to Copilot and you can ask it to do things. And we've been putting out things like Cowork, which is extraordinary. All that chaos somehow gets filtered out, and that makes it look to people like it is completely calm, whereas the underneath the water surface there's like frantic work that's happening, like the ducks, right? Like, I mean, they're going fast and it looks very graceful from the top, but underneath the waterline is where all the work is.
Brilliant. And that brings me to another question, which is my obsession for the last 14 years has been organize your little corner of the internet,
Yeah.
make all the dots join up, make everything clear, make everything consistent, and keep it that way. Two things happen. Number one is all of the engines, whether it's ChatGPT, Bing, Google Search, Claude, will all say the same thing about you. And there are a couple of things going on. Number one is I'm the only organized entity.
Mhm.
And so my obsession with that over the last 14 years has brought this incredible consistency. But number two is the engines and the algorithms are attracted to that organization because the web is such a mess.
Yeah, and think about how, for example, crawlers behave, right? If you are exposing the crawlers to a tremendous amount of unorganized information, the crawlers may be able to fetch this content, but once the content is fetched, that needs to get processed in some form so that we can make it available to the end user, right?
Mm.
And also, if imagine a site which has extremely convoluted JavaScript that you have just made because somehow it is a brilliant idea to bring all this complexity to bear. People do weird things with JavaScript, for example, right? And they take what is an easy environment like HTML and then they convert it for a good reason. And there are places where this technology is very useful for providing interactivity and so on, right? But then the underlying infrastructure has to process all of the thinking that went into the formulation of the JavaScript. And we have to figure all of it out. Yes, there is structure in the JavaScript and we can process it, but that actually is additional work. And so, we say, hey, present a simple HTML because it's faster and the users are expecting speed, right?
Right. And there's also the big question of cost of retrieval, which is an obsession of many people in the industry, is saying the more it costs Microsoft or Google to retrieve the information and store the information, the less favors they're going to do us.
Right, but operating at the internet scale, cost is getting reduced quite drastically, right? So if you really think about how much it takes to crawl a site, there is a bandwidth component to it. So the more you are disorganized with how you're setting up your site or the structure of your content, the more there is consumption of bandwidth and the more processing it takes. So presenting things simply is actually elegant and parsimonious, and humans are completely not geared for this.
Right. Yep. Well, which is why I built Kalicube Pro, which it does that work for you. So you organize it once, and my machine keeps it all organized. And the approach is to say the machine sees the information on your entity home website. So what I'm saying about myself, and I claim and frame whatever I want, and then I link out to the corroboration and the proof, and try to get the corroboration proof to link back, and the machine goes on an infinite loop of self-corroboration.
Yeah, and this corroboration is becoming more and more important, right? Like, because now we talk about authority and authenticity as key components, and being able to verify and actually ground your responses in data and actual facts is becoming more and more important. In fact, I co-authored a blog with some of my amazing colleagues, Knut Risvik and Meenaz Merchant, on this very topic of how these kinds of signals on authority and authenticity have become more center place in the grounding world than it has ever been. There's always been a component of how do you make sure that your site is authentic and it actually addresses user problems and so on. But those dimensions are getting more and more and more amplified as we get into this whole AI space, right? And we wrote a lot about this in our blog and explained as to why this is the case.
Right. I mean, a big component has to be how well I organize myself, because the same information well organized is going to be more powerful than that information disorganized.
Right. Structure actually matters, right? Because it's easier for us to figure out what's going on, right? Like, so, because if you think about all of these systems that figure out what is going on with content, they are probabilistic systems, right? And so there is error around that. So structure allows us to reduce error. In fact, we have said that schema actually helps in many cases. There are other schools of thought, I understand, but for our platform, this matters because if you think about an e-commerce site that has pricing and stock and reviews and other product-related information, the schema actually is a good representation of the product. And if people are looking for a product, that schema helps with how we process information. So the structure actually does matter. We understand that things are chaotic and things are miscellaneous for lots of people, but there is actually a book called Everything is Miscellaneous, which is a fascinating read if you're in this space, by the way. So.
Brilliant. And taking it beyond structure, it's also, structure within my own web page, which is schema Markham, and it's lovely to hear that it still has some kind of value. The structure between my website and the outside world. So the more I can structure my digital footprint and the more I can structure the back and forth between my site and the digital footprint, the better.
Right. And there is always an implicit assumption that we make that if more people are linking to you or calling upon you or citing you, that content has more value or authenticity because it's more vetted by multiple views of what that content is, right? Whether the people are for the idea or against the idea, that's not the debate over here. The question is, do people find the content valuable enough to take a position on it? So so as a search engine, I do not care about any bias that people might have. My job is to index everything, right? So I don't serve a biased version of what's happening, or we try to unbias things. There's always bias in the system, but we try to work very hard to reduce that bias because we as humans have some bias always, right? However, it's not my job to say, oh, you should be for this idea or against this idea, right? It is my job to say, here is the idea. So if people are finding a piece of content useful, then there is some sort of value attribution that linking to or linking out of that content has, right? So that has been pretty important for the web. And now that is equally important, right? Like, I mean, people talk about link juice. That's still a thing, right? So
yeah, link juice. What about mention juice?
Mentions are important. And the context in which you get mentioned is also very important, right? Like, so if people are saying, hey, somebody has a great idea and it's a very positive mention, the sentiment around that actually tells users something about that piece of content, right? Like, and similarly, if there is a completely negative sort of attribution, there is something around that as well. So just for for the most part, it is very important for people to understand that mentions are important. Like, it's one of the many signals that are important, right? So,
of course, yes. So with my Kalicube framework, it isn't so much important that everybody agrees with me, but I do need to create discussion around it to demonstrate that it has value in the world, whether people agree with exactly how this functions or they disagree, but there's a debate going on.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is true of the traditional search systems. That is true of the AI systems, right? Like, we are interested in the conversations that happen, and many sources that are conversational, where there is a lot of debate around ideas, actually do get selected for citations, if you notice, because there is pros and cons, and the systems are able to look at both dimensions or all dimensions of the problem, right?
Brilliant. So here we were looking at this earlier on with the bot part is DSCRI, which is something Fabrice Canel taught me. Discover, select, crawl, render, index. So far so good. We've got crawled and indexed, and index to annotation is the key I want to look at now. As you index and you put the content into the index, you're transforming whatever content you find, whether it's PDF or an HTML file, and through the JavaScript sometimes into your own proprietary format. And as you put it into the index, you annotate the chunks or the parts of information with multiple aspects of what it's about, what entities are in there, whether it's geographically aligned with something, what other pieces of content might be related to it. And I'm calling it basically little sticky notes that you're putting on the content. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, the content is parsed, right? Like, that's well known that the content does get parsed, and there is proprietary algorithms that get applied to how. So this is called content understanding, right? Like, so that has been an artifact for a long time now, and these things keep evolving. There's various representations of the content. Different companies do prefer to do it differently. people nowadays say, well, is this all transformed to a markup? There's a lot of debate about it, but the fact is that there is some transformation that happens.
And what about the annotation and the sticky notes?
If you think about the transformation, what we're trying to make sense of is what the content is about, right? Like we're trying to understand what happens within a piece of content, right? So that inherently means that we are able to label some things and not label some other things, right? So there is signposting of what the content is and what are the entities contained within it, right? Like so that's always been the case, and that still continues to be the case. Right. And also, particularly in the grounding world, there is parts of the content that you don't want us to use, right? Like, for example, people might enclose something in data-nosnippet. That is something that the system needs to know that we shouldn't use it, right? Like, so obviously there is a way to process it, right?
Brilliant. Okay. And I talk a lot about the algorithmic trinity. So I would say LLM for intelligence, having the conversation, search engines for up-to-date and niche information, an information layer that the LLM doesn't have in its training data, and then knowledge graphs for verification, fact checking. And my argument is all assistive engines to function reliably have to have some combination of those three technologies.
Right. So the major systems that are out there that people are using these days, whether they are Copilot, Bing, and so on, the model is a representation of the state of the world at the time of training, right? Like so pretty much every model has something, as you know, called a knowledge cutoff date. So if the model were to be queried about current events after the cutoff date, and the model did not have access to any other information, it would not be able to answer it, or it would fabricate something, right? Yeah. People refer to it as hallucinations. There are various safety layers to prevent this, but it still would make something up if it did not have that piece of information built into its memory, so to say, right? So there needs to be some other mechanism for providing this memory, and that is what we call grounding, right? Like, for example, WebIQ is that mechanism, or the whole IQ layer that Microsoft has essentially announced yesterday is that mechanism, where we're saying there is multiple ways in which you can attach new knowledge to the context of the LLM operating, so that it can make some sound decisions about what to present back to the user. And this is where freshness matters, right? Like, so we are seeing in the AI world that fresh content is always useful because people are asking more and more current information about it. Like, if you think about some of the queries that people ask, summarize the news for me from this morning, right? Like, so that is a very current query, right? So freshness matters, and this is the context in which we operate. This knowledge attachment has to happen. There's multiple ways to attach this knowledge, right? Like, so one is through a search index. The other is through the official, like if you're in an organization, you can attach the organization's context to it. But there's always some sort of knowledge provisioning that needs to happen to have current state represented in the responses that users get.
Right. And one of those formats can be a knowledge graph.
It could be, and different systems use it differently. There are proprietary formats that people use. In the context of WorkIQ, for example, that Microsoft uses, you can imagine that it has been derived over a period of time from the work that we have done with Microsoft Graph, right? But there is a lot more to it, and similarly, other people have various other dimensions that they may use. The graph is ultimately a form of representing the information, right? Whatever form of representation you choose, there is a mechanism to bring that information in, right?
Right. And I know that this isn't Bing, but I talk a lot about Google's multiple vertical knowledge graphs. They have multiple knowledge graphs. And when you think about it, everybody has multiple knowledge graphs. And it's just a question of how you're storing the data and where it's pulling from.
Yeah. Graph is a mathematical entity, as you and I are very familiar with it, right? So the mathematical entity that you choose to represent the knowledge is important. And it depends on context. People will transform it. People will save it in different ways. Sometimes it's graphical. Sometimes it's not. It varies, but in general, graph is a well-established knowledge representation that gets attached to these systems.
Brilliant. And if we move forwards to display, now we have somebody, a user who types in or speaks a query. Queries are getting longer and longer, as I understand it. And you have 5 substages before the retrieval runs. So I've seen examined, understood, normalized, rewritten, and expanded across multiple variants. Can you explain that before you fetch the document?
Right. So I think in many of my talks, I break down this workflow in a lot of detail, right? Like, so the first thing that most users think when they enter a query is that they have expressed their intent quite clearly, but it's not the case, right? Like, I mean, so it's super ambiguous, and sometimes even the clearest of queries is extremely ambiguous to the system, right? Like, case in point is like people's names versus movie names is a huge problem, right? Like, so.
Sorry, why particular? You mean people's names that are movies, or do you mean people's names that are ambiguous?
Movies, right? People's names that are movies, or people's names that are street names. It's a very ambiguous query. You can tell me, you can ask a query like, tell me something about Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a town. It is also a name of a person. So there, even though in your local context may be super clear to you, the system operates at a much higher global context, and then it has to winnow down to your local context, right? So the query is ambiguous for the most part. So it goes through multiple stages that we essentially have to, process, so that we can figure out what the user actually intends and then create a response. So query rewriting is obviously one part of it. Query fanouts, people are very familiar with it. For every intent that the system thinks that a user is asking for, there is a fanout query that happens. And then for every fanout, there is a ranking that happens. And then ultimately there is a combination that is created that will then get processed downstream. So in traditional search, once that ranked list is created, it just gets presented to the user. But in grounding, this is a very different problem, right? Because the system is expected to create an answer, and that answer needs to be accurate. So the system also, in the context of, for example, some of the WorkIQ stuff that I talked about, there is challenge that happens to the knowledge that gets generated out of all this. And there is another model that will say, what if this response is wrong? And it will challenge that, right? Like, so there is a critique, there is multiple models that operate, and finally, the responses are usually these days a synthesis of what the system finds as accurate, and also will point out, hey, by the way, there are these inaccuracies that I detect in this, right? Like, so the processing is much more involved with these systems.
Brilliant. And another question, I mean, I've been calling them cascading queries rather than fan-out queries, and I don't know why I thought that was better. And I actually now think I know why I thought that was better, and I might put that to you, is, are there also queries in there that are trying to look at what's going to be asked next in the funnel? So saying, after this question, not only do I need to answer this question, but I need to think about what's going to be coming next.
So in AI systems, like in Copilot, you get prompts that the system has created that essentially says, hey, what do you want me to do next? I can take track A, track B, or track C. I can focus this, I can broaden the answer, I can provide you with specific data points. That essentially is one of the final steps that happen, right? Like, so the query has been generated, the fanouts have happened, the information has been retrieved and ranked, and now there's synthesis that is happening and information gets generated. At that point, the system also introspects and says, what might the user want over here in addition, right? Like, that is one of the most beautiful pieces of engineering that I can imagine, because somebody is saying, hey, the human that is actually operating the system might want to ask these questions, and I'm going to preempt it, right? And that is the true brilliance of some of these systems that's coming out. It's not an easy thing to do.
Well, the two things there. Number one is fan-out query is one thing, then cascading queries is potentially another, which, if I'm calling it cascading queries, is saying, what are the follow-ups?
Yeah, so I think in your case, what you're saying is cascading queries is your way of calling a follow-up question, right? Like, so
Yeah.
the follow-up question actually is eventually going to generate more fan outs, right? Like, so if you ask it a follow-up question, then that also has fan outs and that has this document parsing and
Ooh.
all of the features that
So
it is. So
so
every
we have query, fan out, cascading, query,
right.
fan
So
out, cascading. Sorry.
So the user will ask a question, we will create an answer, and then we provide these options at the bottom saying, hey, what more do you want to do with this? Do you want to take step A, step B, whatever, right? And let's say the user selects step A. Then there's processing related to that that has to happen, right? Because the user has just asked you a new question, but the context remains, right? So that's where things like memory start to play a role, right?
Yeah. And that you said it's a beautiful piece of engineering to predict what the next questions are going to be
Right.
and explain why that's a particularly interesting and beautiful piece of engineering.
It is an artifact of the thoughtfulness aspect of humans, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like um to anthropomorphize systems very much because ultimately this is still AI and it's a machine model and it is not a human, in my opinion, right? But it is about humanizing the system in some way because if you talk to somebody who really cares about giving you a response, they're going to sort of anticipate what you want next, right? And they might say, hey, by the way, I'm bringing you this cup of coffee because you asked me to bring this cup of coffee, but please know that this is warm. Do you want a sleeve for it? Right? So it is such a small thing, right? Like, but imagine the AI system is doing that, where it says, okay, I've just given you the answer to your question. And by the way, I think you might ask the following 3 questions or 4 questions or whatever else, right? And without you having to write a prompt or ask an explicit question, the system allows you to just select the question that it has thought of for you. And then it will process that question for you, right? Like, so the answer to that question. So that is where the brilliance of the engineering comes in, right? Like, so it is a very, very hard thing to do because the questions that people see underneath Copilot, they're not just some random questions. They are in the context of what you just asked. It's not bringing in like something completely out of context in that space. So that is extremely hard to achieve.
Beautiful. And that actually kind of brings me to my final question, which is what we therefore have is a machine that is effectively bringing the person down the funnel from awareness to consideration to decision, and what I've been calling the perfect click, which Fabrice Canel initially said to me a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and this, if you really think about what is happening with agentic systems, you start with an initial intent and you're asking the system to sometimes act on your behalf, right? Like, so there is semi-autonomous or autonomous. You might tell the system, hey, check in with me to see how I might want to deal with this particular scenario that you're processing. Or in the case of something like I want to book the cheapest airline ticket at 9 a.m. on Thursday, just do it for me on this airline, right? Uh, in those cases, you've basically delegated the action to
Yep.
the agentic system because you trust that it will make the call and it will make the call as though you would have made the call, right? Like the personalization aspect. So if you can also say, hey, by the way, I always book an aisle seat, right? Like, so if you really think about it, the decision making ultimately is the compression that you see, right? Like you can delegate a question to an agent, and it will actually do the action on your behalf. That's the scary part as well, right? Like, what if the action is wrong? And so human oversight is always required. But it is quite amazing that you can get to a decision that quickly, right?
Yeah, and it is the kind of last point, which is you've delegated decision. I'm calling it the delegation boundary. To what extent we're delegating in each situation. In a search engine, you're delegating, give me the top 10 list. On an
Yeah.
assistive engine, you're delegating, give me a very short list of 1 or 2 and help me to make the decision, recommend something to me. And on the agentic side, you're delegating the actual action. So you have what I call the imperfect click, the perfect click, and the agentic click.
Yeah, I think that the delegation boundary in what you're pointing out is true, and that delegation boundary is different comfort zones for different people, right? Like for
Yes.
some people, it's like just provide me with the 10 links and don't do anything else, right? And for other people, it's like just do it for me. I don't want to deal with this. Just process it, right? Like so, that is essentially a human boundary, right? Like the delegation boundary. But you can these days delegate something completely to a system if you so choose, right?
Yeah. Well, my example is I always buy the same socks. They're the same size. I buy them from Uniqlo. Agent, go and do it. But my girlfriend collects socks. So she wants the 10 links because she wants to go window shopping.
Of course. And that control needs to be retained for the end user always, right? So this is why search will never go away, because it's an information seeking behavior, and humans always seek information in some form or the other. Even when people think that they're not seeking information, they do. AI systems are increasingly more about decision support, decision processing, right? If you really think about it that way. So all of these modalities still need to exist in the system. And that is what makes it so amazing. And how do you delegate it? What is the control that you provide? What are the security mechanisms? All that is what engineering is becoming, right? Like so.
That is the most beautiful ending. Thank you so much, Krishna. That was delightful. Thank you, everybody. And see you in the next session.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm so happy to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to more such conversations in the future.
Ooh,
thank you.
Definitely.